Namaste and good evening, everyone. We are welcoming also Narad tonight with us. Namaste, Narad, and Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste and welcome to everybody.
We are happy to have Narad with us. So today we will continue current affairs and with a special focus today on some events related with United States of America. In particular, to the USS Liberty incident of 1967 and the two bombers of the New Year's of 2025. As usually, you may post your questions during our conversation in the chat box, or you may send beforehand at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com.
The theme which I wanted to take today will go in some depth on certain critical events, and always our goal in study of current events is to go behind the scenes, to not be deceived by the public appearance, but also not be deceived by superficial analysis which tends to direct blame on one group or other, and to be able to go all the way to underlying actual causes. And so I'm taking these as an example because not only they are so poignant, but they help us to go so much deeper in understanding things. The first incident is recorded as the USS Liberty incident. It took place in June of 1967 during the Six-Day War in which Egypt attacked Israel. And when the war actually started, all the ships from that area in the Mediterranean were moving out. No one wants to be in a space where they can be hit by mistake. But this particular ship, the USS Liberty, was actually made to approach closer. The background to this is an interview which I have put the link for, and there are several links which I have shared. All of them are important for those who really want to dive deep and study. But two of them I have marked important and very important. So if you don't look at anything else, at least look at those. It will give you an understanding of things which you would not get otherwise. In the first interview is a survivor of this ship, USS Liberty, and he speaks to Candace Owens, who is one of those quite outspoken leaders in the United States politics. She is a Trump supporter, naturally, but she has her own biases, as you will see within the discussion, and we will address that as we go along. But the event itself is deeply disturbing and shocking. So the person who's being interviewed was at that time a young man in the Navy, US Navy. He was invited or ordered to join on a ship which he was told was a ship for oceanography, that is studying the ocean bottom using sonars. But in fact, it had so many radars and dishes pointing up, so he said this seems to be unusual. He was on the ship for, I think, nearly 2 years. And at some point during this whole operation, the ship was directed into the Mediterranean and made to approach Israel. And they were told they were entering a war zone, but nobody was told what was actually happening. What he describes is, once he boarded the ship, he got to know that the bulk of the people, nearly 200 people on the ship, were CIA and NSA spies, because it was a monitoring ship. It was an intelligence, a communications ship intended to monitor. Wherever it went, it would be spying and registering with the most broadband antennas to cover all the specialized communications and so on. So it was a spy ship, effectively. Today, those ships are made much smaller. Often you will find around the Bay of Bengal sometimes Chinese, what they call fishing boats, but these are full of antennas which are spying and so on. So as they were approaching, he describes how there were the Israeli planes which came, positively identified them and made communications. They were close enough to the shores that they could see bombs going off in the Sinai, Mount Sinai. So that's really, really close. I believe it is 10 miles or 10 kilometers, probably 10 miles in the US. But what is strange is when you have a war ongoing, no ship stays that close. If they do, then they are always in communication to ensure that there is no false identification. And we'll look at what happened subsequently and how later in the cover-up they were told that several messages were sent to the ship to move away to a distance of 100 miles, but the ship did not get the messages. Now this is impossible. 1967, we are talking of already very advanced communications technologies, and within the military, you can't send multiple messages and not get a confirmation or not know that the message has not been received, because there's always an acknowledgement process. You would always know, and multiple messages would not be missed. So there are many false red flags, let's say, to indicate that something was done as a cover-up. Subsequently, as they've approached, they ask for an escort to protect them because it's a very large ship, and the escort was refused. And then it turns out, on the Israeli side, the ship was removed from the war table. That is, its existence was removed totally. And that's when the attacks began. So first there was one unmarked aircraft which came and approached the ship. Why it had to be unmarked, you will understand, because in the initial point of approach, the ship was in communication with the entire 6th Fleet and others. So they didn't know who it was. The first thing that the unmarked aircraft did, it knocked out all the communication antennas. Then it knocked out all the fire hoses, so that once it attacks, you could not communicate out to say what was happening during attack or even that you were attacked. You could not put out fires. And then it shot all the watertight doors at the ship's water level so that it would start to sink. Now, having done this, they moved away, and from there came the next round, which were the torpedo boats meant to sink the ship. What happened meanwhile, though, and this is one of those elements of divine grace, and you see how the grace works, one of the communication antennas was not working. It was offline because it had some problem, technical problem. And when this plane came, it was an Israeli Defense Force plane. When it came and shot, they used special missiles which track the radar's communication. So whenever there's an active radar, the missile will hit it. So they had knocked out all the radars, all the communication signals, and all the dishes for communication, because anything transmitting was knocked out. They were satisfied that there was no way this ship could communicate, but actually there was one communication dish which was not working. So it was switched off for repairs. So one of the sailors now activates that, gives it a special long wire because the dish was not working, but the unit was functioning, and sends out an SOS signal, which is received by the 6th Fleet, which was received all the way to Vietnam. It's a global signal that's going out saying we're being attacked by an unknown aircraft. So at that point, from the USS Saratoga, from the 6th Fleet, there is a plane which immediately is launched. Several planes are launched to defend this ship. And as soon as they are launched, the US Secretary of Defense sitting in the United States intervenes and orders this plane to return. Subsequently, when he was asked what happened during that day in an official interview, he said he didn't remember anything which happened. Now, obviously, you know that's part of the cover-up. What happens next is the captain of the ship, when he realizes, when he's told that it's been recalled by the Secretary of Defense, he bypasses the chain of command, goes directly to the US President. Now, for this bypass, which he had to do to protect his ship, he was later dismissed and severely criticized. He faced a lot of criticism, but he was fired from his position as captain. He was a highly decorated captain who had been in the Second World War, had many awards. So he bypasses the chain of command, goes all the way to the US President, who is Lyndon B. Johnson. And at that point, 8 more aircrafts have been launched from the USS America, which is also a little farther away. 8 aircrafts are coming. Lyndon Johnson intervenes and actually tells Captain Tully that I do not care if a few American lives are lost. I will not embarrass my friend and ally Israel. Now what was interesting was Captain Tully and the ship itself did not know who had launched the attack. They came to know only later. But the US President already knew and spoke the words saying that he knew it was Israel which was attacking, and he would not embarrass Israel. And later, as I said, Tully was fired for having bypassed the chain of command. But at that point, all the hopes are dashed. What follows next is another aircraft comes, and this one drops napalm. Napalm, as you know, was extensively used by the US forces in Vietnam. It was used earlier. It was developed somewhere in the middle of the Second World War. So it was extensively used through the 1970s, late into 1970s, after which it was banned. Why it was banned is because unlike spraying petrol, kerosene, or diesel, which you can use to set fire, napalm has chemicals, additives, which make it sticky. So it will flow like a liquid. If you spray it, it will be a sticky gas. And when it ignites, they add further additives that it continues to burn. It burns at 1,000 degrees and it continues to burn. You cannot put it out by conventional means. They even add a little bit of phosphorus into it so that even water will not put it out easily. And this is normally used in the most horrific way. One of the things it does is it burns your skin, of course, it burns the air, and in the air it releases carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, so you start suffocating, and it burns your lungs because you're breathing in this very fine fume which then burns inside. And once it catches fire on the skin, there is no way to put it out. It continues to burn. Even after the fire is put out externally, the liquid inside continues as if to burn internally. So it's one of the worst things you could do. And this napalm is dropped on the entire ship. And of course, at that point, there are literally hundreds of people who are dying. That's when torpedo boats come, which have the Israeli Defense Force flag on the markings. So by this time, they are convinced that there is no communication possible, and so they don't need to hide their identity, and they fire 5 torpedoes. And again, here you see how the grace acts. 4 torpedoes miss. The 5th one hits the ship, but interestingly, it accidentally hits the main hull frame. So where the frame is strongest, that's when it hits. Had it hit just a little off by a few meters either side, the entire ship would have broken into 2 and sunk within minutes. But when it hits the main hull frame, that takes the brunt of the explosion. Instead, now there's a huge hole and the ship tilts to one side. So they've used up all their torpedoes, they cannot do more, and by then the USS Liberty is putting out life rafts to save its people. And again, the defense forces, IDF forces come in boarding vessels this time. They shoot those who are on the life rafts. Now you'd ask yourself, why would that be? Remember, this is a clear day. There's a huge US flag. There are communications. There has been identification. Everything would let them know that it's a US ship. Why would you shoot people who are actually trying to save themselves after you've brought down the ship already? And at one point, they take one of the sailors who's just been killed as a trophy on board. So you can see that he's wearing the American Navy uniform and so on. And the person, the survivor, narrates, and when you see that interview, it goes in some gory detail. I'm just giving a quick summary. There's a point where he makes a gesture at the other side with his finger, points his finger. The other man points back his finger the same way and smiles. He knows what he's doing. So the group which was attacking knew that they were attacking an American ship. Their goal was to ensure there were no survivors. And why would that be important? Because nobody should live to tell the tale of what was actually the source of the attack. As it turns out, there are more than 800 rocket holes, cannon holes, 5,000 armor-piercing bullets, napalm still burning, that goes on for days together. There's a 45-foot torpedo hole, ship is listing to its side, and no help for 17 hours. So they expected that overnight the ship would sink eventually because it was already tilted, listing as they say. It didn't. So at that point there was no other way, and eventually the help arrives 17 hours late, when in fact the nearest ship was 40 minutes away. 2 US submarines recorded the entire attack and the events, recorded through their periscopes. They were nearby. And it's on record that they have the video recordings of these. They did not help, and the videos are classified. After a few days, a senior US admiral boards the ship, and after boarding, his first order to all the surviving sailors, so 34 people died and more than 170 were severely wounded, burnt mostly, and he orders them to never speak of the events. never speak even amongst each other, and never speak to others. And the threat given specifically, if they spoke, they would be fined, or they would be imprisoned, or worse. The worse means they would be killed. And all of them understood what that meant. They did not understand why it had to be suppressed. To calm them, later it became the most decorated ship, single ship for a single engagement in US history. So that's interesting because that was a way of bribing them. Israel later declared that it was done by mistake and it was a false identification. They gave a few $1 million in reparation to the US Navy, but very little actually came to the people who were wounded. And the official cover story was that there were several messages sent to the ship to move away, as I said, to 100 miles away, which did not reach, which is impossible in any naval official military communications generally. That it was mistaken identification by Israeli Defense Forces, which is not correct. And it's impossible because of the flag, the clear names, and it was a clear day, and the earlier communications which were on record. That even when there was a mistaken communication, when the gunships came, one of the gunners shot by mistake, which is again not true, and aircrafts were recalled due to a misunderstanding or miscommunications, which again is impossible. In military communications, you do not have these kinds of errors. Communication is one of the key elements for any war. There's one very famous US admiral who was heading the European command as well as Pacific command. So that's really high up, Admiral Moore. And it was his public declaration about this event that it is impossible that it could ever have been a mistaken identification. Subsequently, the media attacked any soldier who spoke up, any naval person who spoke up, and they were either declared publicly as liars or Nazis or Jew haters. So this kind of a propaganda effort was made to ensure things were silenced. Any Freedom of Information Act relating to this event application is blocked on the grounds of national security. The event incident was removed from US history and US naval history. So people have gone through naval history as part of being in the Navy in the US and have not heard about this. Now, this would be one of the single most important events if you look at the history of the US Navy for many reasons. Nevertheless, at the very least for the lessons learned. Oh, you had a failure of communication, you had mistaken identity, you had all these, so many setbacks, so many communications failed. It should never happen. What are the corrections we should do to ensure it shouldn't happen? It should be part of naval history, isn't it? But it's erased from history, and that shows, of course, the cover-up that takes place. And the person who's interviewed by Candace Owens, he actually says that when he tried to get some publicity over this, the person who was willing to fund initially, once he saw the events, he said, no, if I do anything, I'll be labeled anti-Semitic. Now, this is an important point because in the interview itself, Candace Owens and he, both being Christian, they have this thing about, oh, Israel did it. And it often takes a racial turn. And I want to highlight this is the common error you will find in any such analysis. So when you look at events, yes, there's a cover-up. When you go behind to who did it and why and who's covering up, then it tends to stop at that layer. In this case, because of their Christian bias, as you know, it's something which in India you do not understand too well, that Christians have this dislike or hatred for Jews, and among the Jewish people there is something against the Christians. It's a complicated thing, which goes back to something which happened 2,000 years ago, which has no relevance today, but nevertheless. The point though here is, the intention behind and the group behind is what we have referred to earlier as the cabal. The global cabal, remember, is global. It does not care for your race, for your nationality, or for your beliefs, whether you're religious, spiritual, or atheist. It doesn't matter. They are looking at their agenda. And if the agenda is to create a war, then you create what is called a false flag event. Somebody attacks, who's your own person, but it's done under the impression of someone else, or the blame is put on someone else. In this case, the goal was to blame Egypt. And in fact, for a while, the media actually declared that the attack was done by Egypt until the evidence was unavoidable that it was actually the Israeli Defense Forces. And the cabal itself operates, we have discussed this before, but it's important to understand and we repeat so. They operate within different countries in the one place which is protected by law from your questioning. And what is that? Your intelligence agencies. And I say your intelligence agencies because across the world, across all countries, you have intelligence agencies. By law, what happens within the intelligence agencies is protected and hidden. You cannot apply for Freedom of Information Act. You cannot question what they do in their intelligence operations. Sometimes they will do things which are illegal, and they are legally empowered to do illegal things. This is the weird part. And all the funding that goes to them is covered under national security. So you can send a huge amount and it goes into intelligence operations, and by your patriotic feelings, you will never be able to question what was done with that money. So you understand, this is the best place for any mischievous entities to hide. In the initial process, maybe the intelligence agencies have been genuine, good. But as you can see, an infiltration once begun, in time within 1 or 2 generations, typically at least within 3 generations, at most within 3 generations, it can get infiltrated and taken over by whatever agency infiltrates. This is one of the reasons why the intelligence agencies have to keep vetting themselves, double checking themselves, and one of the methods they use sometimes, they lay traps for their own agents. They monitor their own agents as if they are monitoring an enemy, just in case they have been infected, infiltrated, or approached by the enemy. And there are very strict regulations. In case they are approached by anyone, they have to report. They are made to go, let's take the example of the United States, they have to go through a intelligence debriefing where they spill their personal lives totally. They go through lie detector tests every so many weeks or months, depending on how high up they are in the chain of command. But again, the question you have to ask, if such is the mechanism for protecting your intelligence agencies, who is protecting the protectors? And this is the key. The mechanism which tests your own agents itself is never tested. At some point, high up, and it's not even the person appointed by the civilian government, it's the internal mechanism of actual power holding. At that level, once that person who tests others is compromised, there is absolutely no way to avoid this. The entire agency will be infected. Maybe at the highest levels, because they have to keep a veneer of appearance. They will ensure that only those who they can influence to become part of the cabal get promoted. Others are used as what is called cannon fodder. They are sent, as in this ship, to the front lines to be killed, basically. And so they eliminate those who are contrary to their cabal interests, promote those who are in the cabal, and the promoters, the control center, once infected, there is no way to reverse this. This is what happens, as I gave the example earlier, even within the judiciary. We have spoken a lot about this. The example in India, from I think 1989 onwards, the judiciary began to take charge of its own promotions, and the group once infected at the top, then there is no way to ensure that it can ever be cured from its anti-national, leftist or other agendas. And this is the case for all agencies. Except that in overt politics, you have a chance for someone to get elected because people choose. Even though the media is against, even though the existing bureaucracy is against, etc. These are what I have described earlier as the disruptors. Donald Trump, Narendra Modi, Putin, Elon Musk, etc. You don't have to like them, but they cut through the system despite the system trying to block them. Otherwise, normally somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, although everybody admires her, you will not find anybody on either side of the difference of the different parties. All of them admire her because she is so genuine in her national interest and in her clarity of communication, and genuinely affectionate and tender in her positions she takes, even when criticizing others. And yet, in the primaries, she was eliminated because the media attack against her was so strong. They declared her eliminated, and then the mechanism of selection, of course, did not consider her because the media declared who can be potentially president for the next round. So the mechanism is so well controlled that you can never go up the chain, except occasionally when enough people wake up. And that's how Narendra Modi came to power or Donald Trump came to power. And they had to also navigate very carefully, because if they take any position, even the slightest controversy, the media will amplify that to such an extent that people will have a negative image and would not vote for them again. So it's a very skillful means by which they have to come to power, and then once in power, they have to also skillfully stay in power, because everything is set up against them. But I'm giving you this bigger picture so you understand how the machinery works. Within the Israeli Defense Forces, it's not even the Defense Forces, they're all loyal. Many of them would have genuine goodwill for the United States because it's one of their major allies, major funding partners, major defense partners in every way. And equally from the US side with Israel, the connections are very deep and genuine. But inside the mechanism at the center, not even of the Israeli Defense Forces, but the component which is tied to the intelligence agencies of Mossad, not even the whole of Mossad, but the controlling center which actually goes through the check process and is completely opaque to all mechanism of validation. Once these are infected, as in the US side or in the Israeli side, between them they can create this game. And this is what happened with the USS Liberty. The cover story was so silly, but the viciousness and the violence with which the cover-up was done shows you the power of the cabal. The original intention was to create a false flag attack to blame Egypt and to draw the United States into the war, not just Africa, but in the Middle East generally, and fight on behalf of the not Israeli interest, cabal interest. So it's not even in Israeli interest that the US should come and fight wars all around. They would want, ideally in the long term, to have peace. So to make war is to breed a generation of enemies for the Israelis. You see, this is one of the points which is often made. If the Israeli Defense Forces destroy or kill some major part of Palestine or Palestinians, you've just bred a whole new generation of enemies. Why would you want to do that? So obviously they act swiftly when it is a question of defense from terrorists, but they would be very careful to avoid not killing genuine civilians, to minimize the collateral damage, as they call it in the war, because they don't want to breed those enemies. All genuine people would want peace with their neighbors. But there is a group, and this is the cabal, which does not want peace at all. They want the world to enter a state of continual war, because that's the way in which they can control, and that suits their larger objectives. It suits their other interests, including making money through wars, because that's how you see in Ukraine what's happening. US has pumped billions of dollars so that Ukraine can buy US arms. And the arms industry has suddenly got boosted, arms shares have gone up, Ukrainian people will die, but the politicians will make money. It was used to be in Europe considered one of the most corrupt countries, and of course the corruption was convenient for this goal. So the people playing the game ensure they are protected, they make money or whatever it is their objectives. There are huge kickbacks which go to politicians who agreed to fund the war and so on. The people suffer. So you must understand, it's not Israel, it's not United States, it's not even the army of the US Navy or the Israeli army or defense force. It is a core group of cabal, and they have to hide. Because if within the army it got to be known that there is a cabal operation and the cabal interests are even against Israeli interests, they will rebel. So the cabal is most afraid of people becoming conscious of their agenda or who they actually are and how they operate. And this is one of the objectives of our purpose in going into this kind of discussion, precisely to bring awareness how it works. So in the interview which you will see, and I would like all of you to watch that, it's quite disturbing, moving, but it also shows you how from the top level, the politician and cabal interests, they don't care for human lives and human suffering. Some of them even celebrate. And to fully appreciate why they celebrate, you have to look at the first few discussions we had on current affairs. Many of them are into practices which ensure they are completely cut off from their deeper conscience and especially from the psychic influence. That they're so warped, so perverted, they are made to become sociopathic in a way that nothing affects them, and they even celebrate when others suffer. Because they hurt so much, they get joy when others hurt or when they cause hurt to others. It's a perversion of humanity of an extraordinary degree. But it's still maybe somebody extremely intelligent in the utilization of their capacity to cause hurt. So this is the background. I wanted to share first what happened. But please, when you watch the interview, be careful not to be swung into the approach that they take, where they say, well, it's Israel, or no, it's not. It's not Israel. It's cabal within Mossad, within Israel Defense Forces, within Israel. And the numbers, in fact, are relatively small, which is why they fear so much being exposed. But because the control systems are so entrenched, they can control through the media and swing things anyway. And that's how they protect themselves. So this is one example which I wanted to share. An important part of this, which the interviewer speaks of, is it appears that this event itself was planned at least a year in advance. And he gives the reasons why. You will see that. The other side, on the US side, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he was the president at that point, who said that he will not do anything to embarrass Israel. What is his background? And again, you have to see how the cabal operates. Remember, he was not an elected president. It was John F. Kennedy who was the elected president. When he was shot, then Johnson takes his place by default. He was vice president. Vice president is selected by the president. And of course, he doesn't have much of a choice, but still, he's selected, and that's how they get their person in. If the president is not directly controlled and he misbehaves, then they have him knocked out and replaced immediately. So what happened when JFK was killed? He was pressuring Israel for its representatives in the US to be registered as foreign agents. Because if, for example, India has a lobbying agent in the US, it has to be registered officially with the government. But Israel has many lobbying agents which are not registered as foreign agents. They are treated as part of the US. Many congressmen in the US actually have dual citizenship with US and Israel. So if ever there's a conflict of interest, which way will they swing? Now, no other country allows that kind of dual citizenship in high politics. So here's, again, it's a good example of great closeness, but also potential for misuse and conflict of interest. That being the case, Lyndon Johnson, apparently, as it turns out, the first thing he did was he removed JFK's attempt to get Israeli representatives to be registered as foreign agents. Second, JFK was working to end nuclear war or the Cold War with Russia. He was working to end the Vietnam War. He wanted to withdraw US troops because the war was already a losing war. He was pressuring Israel to stop making its nuclear reactor. All three things Lyndon Johnson immediately reversed. He again sent more troops into Vietnam. He gave further support to Israeli nuclear reactor. He intensified the Cold War. Everything was reversed. That was part of the agenda because the cabal needed to protect these objectives. So the important thing I'm trying to show here is there is always a second line which the cabal keeps prepared. It's one of their strategies. If ever somebody not controlled directly by them goes too much out of the way, you eliminate them and let their person take over. There's also a general tendency, remember, human beings are hackable creatures, as they keep telling us. General tendency to manipulate events, especially shocking events, to swing public opinion. Pearl Harbor was one such. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the shock of that attack was so great, public opinion swung to support US entering the Second World War. Now, you cannot believe that the entire Japanese fleet could approach all the way to the US and not be detected. In fact, there's lots of evidence, there are many documentaries which show how they had been detected from various US bases in the middle of the Pacific, from various ships. They had all sent out messages which were suppressed or ignored, or they were told to stand down until the attack actually occurred. And when the attack occurred again, when the chain of command went up to the top, they waited. They waited until sufficient destruction occurred before they began to fight back. So this is an example of how a false flag, in this case it's a genuine flag, but an attack is allowed to happen. Or in this particular case of the USS Liberty, it was a false flag attack, which was done by certain operatives who would not be part of the normally Israeli Defense Forces. They would be special operatives which are cabal controlled, who would do the dirty deed, and then they would vanish from inside the IDF. Even the Israeli forces would not know who went out that day and did that dirty work, because they would be vanished. They would be erased from the actual data of people in the list of who flew that day, or they would have some pseudonyms and so on. That's generally how the intelligence agencies operate when they operate within through the armed forces and so on. But having created a false flag attack in this case, then the rest of the machinery swung and played around. So 9/11 was one such. The September 11th attack on the United States, where the Twin Towers were brought down. If you go into the details of it, the towers had just been bought by someone a few months before, who raised the quantum of the insurance and added to it terrorist attack. Normally terrorist attack is not added to insurance, because that's something which you cannot calculate for. He actually paid extra for terrorist attack, and went out making billions of dollars more than what he had invested to buy the buildings. So there are many such things happening. The company which actually on about 15 days before the attack, the entire security cameras of the two buildings were switched off for a period of 24 hours. The company which actually operated that at that time for the security cameras was owned by the Bush family. So a lot of internal, let's say, protective interests which ensured that what needed to be done to bring down the buildings was done quietly, kept within the family, and ensured that everybody profited from it. Exactly the day before, the then US Defense Secretary came out with a statement saying that $2 trillion, $2 trillion is a huge amount, which the US government had pumped into the Pentagon US military, was missing, and nobody knew where that money had gone. He comes out with this statement. Securities and Exchanges Commission comes out with a statement that they have just detected a huge fraud, and the next day, when the buildings go down, all the documentation associated with this Securities Exchange Commission fraud and the Pentagon fraud are destroyed. Very conveniently. You see, when you look at these kinds of events, you say, yes, of course, it cannot happen by chance. And there are two buildings which came down. By the way, most of you may not know, there was a third building, Building 7, which also came down in exactly the same way as the other two, with all the floors falling one upon the other. And there's actually a video of the head, and that building was the Securities Exchange Commission. The head of SEC makes a statement that same afternoon. That building didn't even have a fire. He says, we did not know if this building would survive, and so we had to pull it down. And this is on video. And I've seen the video at that time in 2001. And then the video was removed from public access. And the building was pulled down. Now, when you bring down a building in this way, where the floors fall at free fall, and the next floor falls exactly in sync with the previous, it can only be done with demolition charges. And that's a long process which often takes quite a bit of time to set up in very precisely calculated ways. It could not have been a decision taken ad hoc on that day. So, but all this is to show that there's good reason to consider the 9/11 attack itself as a false flag. Those who were blamed, Osama bin Laden in this case, actually came out with a statement denying. In India, we had the statements where he was violently denying, saying, no, we would never do this, this is not our doing. And at that point, George Bush announces a blockade of all messages from Osama bin Laden to media, because he might be sending out secret coded messages for further attacks, which is a sham. You don't need to send out messages in this way. They have their own other means. But it was to ensure people did not know that he was denying it. So, and so on. And of course, there the whole game swung. Osama bin Laden was sitting in Afghanistan and US attacked Iraq. What's the connection? It was an excuse to mobilize forces. I give another example I've mentioned before, that within 3 or 4 days, the US passed a major act, which was a 5,000-page act of the Homeland Security Act. 5,000 pages cannot be built up in a few days. It had been in preparation for months. So all these indicate that there was a false flag event. Pearl Harbor was an actual attack, but allowed. And this particular liberty attack was false flag. So it's very important to understand from cabal perspective, they play you, they play your sentiment, and violent events strongly affecting you emotionally are when you stop thinking. You rise in unison, in anger, in hatred, and that they like. Because that's when rationality or higher spiritual discrimination are covered up by your confusion. The lesson for us, whenever you look at a strong emotional event, especially in political events, military events, and general world affairs which have a strong shock value, be very careful. Do not get carried away by emotions. If you feel strongly about it at that moment, hold back. Wait for your emotions to pass. And only when you can look either from a deeper perspective or a rational perspective, try to see behind appearances. And then look for who benefits. Look for what happens after. You see, one of the things which you would have noticed when Trump won the elections, November by 5th, it was obvious. There were some comments I got also on the emails, you have not commented, what's happening? And it was important in that moment of celebration and jubilation for those who supported Trump or extreme disappointment for those who were against him, there was this exaggeration of emotions, both sides, positive or negative. Wait for the clarity to return. Wait for what happens. See what the movements are from Trump's side as well as his counter moves or moves against him. Wait to see what the actual events are. What if, this is just for argument's sake, Trump himself is putting up a pretense. What are the actions he's taking next? Who are the people he's appointing? That's when you'll begin to see what the genuine intentions are. Or what happens from the cabal side, what are its counter moves? And that's when you'll begin to see who's afraid and why. To what extent will Trump presidency be able to do what it wants to do depending on the positions that the cabal takes? So the real understanding will come after, for which you have to wait. Never allow emotions to sway you, however much they may be positive or negative, or however much you may feel the high of the moment. Maybe enjoy the high if it is positive, or reduce the low if it's a negative, but wait. It will always be a deeper, either psychic discrimination or intuitive perception, moderated by your own reasoning to whatever extent required, because our purity is not clear enough always to see through fully. And then draw whatever conclusions. Even, I would say, even drawing a conclusion, hold it provisionally. So this is the background I wanted to give with a very powerful and intense example, because this interview just came up recently. What is fascinating is the interview itself has seen more than 5 million views. Mainstream media is completely silent. This is what is remarkable. When something so dramatic as what I've just described, and when you hear the interview, it's even more intense. When something so dramatic is being exposed for the first time on such a large scale, you will see, read through the comments that people make. There are people who say, I have been in the US Navy for so many years, and I'm a historian in the US Navy, I never heard of this event. How does that happen? Read through the comments, read through what people have to say. Of course, some of them will have strong biases, which may take a racist or superficial form of blame game. In the interview itself, they use the term Zionists. And Zionists are those who believe that Israel needs to have its own land. But even that's not the goal, that's not the cause. Behind that is the cabal working even within these interest groups. I had a very interesting experience once. I was in one of the Middle Eastern countries for some program, and it happens that the US has a base in that country. And in one of the evening sessions, there were people from the US Navy who were present, and we were chatting with one of them. And there were people from some girls who were there representing from that country, because it was an interfaith dialogue. And the other side, there was this senior person from the Navy who openly said, I am a Zionist. And before that, we had just a wonderful interaction with him. And these girls went, you're a Zionist, but we were told Zionists are such nasty people, you're such a nice fellow. And then he explained what he meant by, or what that term meant for him, etc. And for those girls, it was an eye-opener. They said, we were always taught so many negative things. I'm pointing to these things. Never make the mistake of identifying with a group. And even within the US, Democrat Party or Republican Party, both sides are corrupt. Look at individuals within each party and they stand out. They stand out because the media attacks them. They stand out because media suppresses them initially. If they get too strong, then they are attacked. So that's how you will know who are the genuine intended. Otherwise, there is only uniparty which takes the pretentious position of opposing each other. And this is the case in large parts across the world. When a party has largely good people with a national or other genuine good interest, media attacks them as right-wing. Because currently right-wing is a negative term. So anybody being labeled right-wing, take a pause. Don't say, yes, that's right-wing. Don't fall for that game. Ask, what is the person saying that the media calls right-wing? Oh, they are against illegal immigration. They are against boatloads of people traveling across the Mediterranean and landing in European countries and being given shelter and food and free medicine and free education when their own citizens don't get it. Then they're labeled right-wing. So look at specifics and you'll cut through these media propaganda and pretense. So never confuse with races, political parties or any general interest group. All of these can be infected or controlled, but the group itself is rarely at fault. Often in their front they have genuinely intended people, sometimes foolishly intended people that they play. Who's the controller? What's the agenda? Look behind the scenes. So with this background now, I want to move to two events which took place on the New Year. And I want to observe from this kind of an analysis, from this perspective, to go deep behind appearances. So my intention is basically to help you to understand how, first, things work from there, but also how you can penetrate and cut through appearances. So let's look at what happened in the US. For quite a while, for the last few months, we have had FBI and local National Guards speaking up about how through the more than 12 million illegal immigrants that have come in, all of them are not vetted, many terrorist groups have infiltrated. Take for example, US has this problem with Iran. And if Iranian Hamas or the other groups which are anti-Israel and so anti-US want to really harm the US, they're not going to attack Israel, which is more difficult. They would walk in across the border because you're being welcomed, you're being provided funds, you're being provided Medicare and education freely in many states in the US. You walk in across the border, settle in, you're given all the identity cards required, and at that point, you start doing your mischief and attack from inside the US once you're settled and protected by the government. The same thing happens in India. From Bangladesh, you have large numbers of refugees, illegal immigrants, they cross the border in the middle of the night. On the other side, the West Bengal government greets them, gives them identity cards, give them funds, either to settle in West Bengal so that they become voting entities for that party, or they then immigrate to the other states of India, where they take on, often they change their names, etc., for purposes of economic or other agendas. Some of these are conversion agendas, some of these are terrorist agendas. So, Pakistan, for example, had sent trained military operatives all across India. How would they come in? You can't cross over Pakistani border easily. The poorest border is through Nepal. So literally from Nepal you could have walked into India. There's no barrier there. There's no protection. You could go through the official road. Perhaps someone would check for your visa or passport. But if you step off the road a kilometer away, cross through the mountain or forest on the other side, and then again join the road to somebody who receives you there, nobody checks you. So there are in fact many non-resident Indians. They have to be out 6 months in the year. What they would do is they would go out, come back through Nepal, live in India, go out again and come back to register their 6 months. It's so easy to do. And you have to, of course, ask why it's allowed to be done. That's a more complex question. So for the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, this intelligence community of Pakistan, which is deeply cabal controlled, it's one of the biggest cabal centers in the world, they would send their terrorists through Nepal, they would walk in. They went all over the country, set up terror cells, they set up training cells, uh, training through the madrasas typically, where they would catch young children, brainwash them and radicalize them and so on. They set up focal points at every major highway entering a major city. So that about a kilometer away from the city, they had a choke point. So from Pakistan, in any time of war, they could simply send one signal and all the highways would be blocked. Nothing could move. The entire economy would collapse within a few days. This was part of the agenda. And in order to create trouble, they even sent out terrorists to scout out religious centers, which were obviously non-Islamic, where they could plant bombs and create simultaneous explosions all over the country. Now, this was one of the strategies, which was, of course, it was found out later, but this is the kind of thinking that comes from the cabal interests. So when you have an attack in this way, it does not happen by people entering through conventional means, it goes through the illegal means because it's so much easier. So you had 12 million people, all unvetted. Many of them terrorists, many of them dacoits, people thrown out from jails from their country, sent to the US with what agendas? And I've mentioned in one of the talks earlier, there are videos you will see people, and I've actually seen those videos. They cross the border, they're walking in military style, coordinated in marching, hefty, well-built, typically 20 to 25 years age. And on the other side, they're received with sophisticated buses paid for in advance. They're taken across, bussed to other states, and they come out of the buses. They don't speak a word. They are military style drill, trained. And all of them are carrying large bags, all of them same bags, all of them looking similar. And in one of these videos, the person approaches them, who are you? From which country do you come? They smile and look away, avoid being photographed. These are military. From which country? Many, we don't know who. And so for the last 6 months, there have been so many messages from these FBI as well as Homeland Security, speaking of thousands of sleeper cells created in the United States. Well, one of these was activated. And this was a terror attack. Jihadist named Shamsud, I don't want to give the full name, it's not important, we don't want to give him importance. He rents a car online through an app and plows it into a crowd, killing people. As it turns out, there was actually a barrier which had been planned for the place where New Year celebrations were going on, and the mayor of that place had the barrier removed, effectively allowing this killing. I won't go into that, it's not important. But he was a sleeper cell activated. He comes out, starts shooting people. He is shot and killed. So we don't know anything about him, except when they go to his house, they find very conveniently a page from the Quran opened. And when the video of the page is actually put out, people say, this is not the normal Quran. It's something very weird. There's some appearance. The FBI initially stated that he was not at all a terrorist. It was just accidental. Then they said he was a terrorist but not acting alone. At least 4 or 5 others were involved in the planning. Then after another day, they declare he was a terrorist but he was alone and there was no one else. Now, on what basis do they go through these 3 rapid changes within 24 hours? And obviously it shows you there's a cover-up in place. Whenever you see any major event, observe particularly the first few messages in the media where facts are being displayed. And then within 24 hours, there is the intervention of the cabal-controlled media, which either suppresses the facts or twists and changes them. And then you know there's some operation to moderate public opinions happening. So this was one event which obviously was some kind of a terror attack. But here's the interesting part. In a completely different place in the United States, a white American, Matthew Livelsberger, hires a Tesla car from the same app and from the same company at the same time as this terrorist. He drives up in the Tesla car and stops in front of a Trump hotel, shoots himself, and then blows up with explosives his car. Did you get that? He shoots himself and then blows himself up. There's already a point where you start questioning, how is that possible? So the cover-up says he set up a timer, perhaps, probably it was remote controlled, but then they don't want you to believe there are others. He has to be a lone wolf. So he must have set a timer. And there's a lot of speculation of how that could happen, but why did he shoot himself? What did he do? What was his problem? So in the first case, jihadist, it's obvious he hates whatever. This man, it's not obvious. What is his connection? Interestingly, both of them were in the US Army. And pretty much around the same time, they were both, okay, I'll come to that later. So there's no clear reason why. And in his truck is a mix of firecrackers. Who blows yourself up with firecrackers? Diesel and improvised bombs. Now, who mixes these three things? It's so amateurishly stupid, even as a design. And interestingly, he takes a Tesla car. The message was as if to Trump and Tesla. It's a message to both of them. Had the car been different, the explosion would have been big enough to have killed many dozens and even damaged the Trump hotel majorly. But the Tesla car is a bulletproof car, the Tesla truck. It's a bulletproof truck. Tesla demonstrated by swinging a hammer on it, on the glass, shooting a bullet on it, not a dent in the glass or the steel. And so when the explosion took place, the explosion went upward. So not only it contains from an external explosion, it contained from an internal explosion. Explosion went upward and prevented any loss of life or damage to the building. So the Musk actually commented they chose the wrong car. But still the question you have to ask, somebody was sending a message, supposedly this man. But what was the message? What was his reason for doing this? As it turns out, 24 hours before, he phoned up his girlfriend and was cheerfully speaking with her. So it was not an angry man. It was not a crazy man. What was he doing? It's not obvious. His family came out with a strong statement saying, it's impossible that this man would do this. He was a Trump admirer. And he had the skill, he was trained in the US military, with very advanced skills of making bombs as well as deactivating bombs and communication skills, etc. He could have made far better bombs and more powerful. Why would he do something so kludgy and silly? It didn't make sense. The family came out with a statement. So here's the media now. Media says there is no connection between the two. First they said we're investigating, then they said there is no connection between the two. So now I've given you links for the counter media. In this case, it's an article which is published in the Gateway Pundit. And it's the only media that I know which has covered all three things. The Candace Owens interview, the jihadist, as well as Matthew's truck bomb. They do an analysis. They go into the depth of this history behind these two people, the two supposed terrorist attacks. Both were in the US military. Both were in Afghanistan together. Both visited Fort Bragg and were in training in Fort Bragg together at the same time. Both used exactly the same app to book their vehicles. Both used the same car rental company to book their cars. And the FBI tells you there's no connection between the two. So again you go, ask yourself, no, obviously there's a connection. So what is the connection? That's not obvious. This is where we have to go a little deeper. Whoever set them up, let's say, because this man shot himself before being blown up. So obviously he was also a patsy, as was the other person. Both were set up, so to say. There were controllers behind. So the controllers behind used the same app, used the same car rental company because they were lazy. It was easy to do, they did it, they didn't realize that they were giving themselves away. But they picked two people from the military with the exact same background. How could that be? Now even the jihadist Shamsud, at least a few years ago, he was not radicalized. If he got radicalized, it's in the last 1 year. So it's not obvious why he would do what he did. And I've mentioned before MK Ultra, where people are made to do things without them realizing through hypnosis and other training programs. So as it turns out, in the training programs for which Matthew Levelsberger went, they had many kinds of psychological training also. So we don't know whether they were both MK Ultra victims. If they were, that would make sense. So there's one central control. There's obviously a tendency for central control. But we come to something even more interesting, and this is what I'm highlighting. This is what I've referred to as dangerous knowledge. Fortunately, Matthew knew that he was in danger. So he sent out private emails a few days ago, a few days before this event of the first on the new year. The email was sent to at least 2 people who have come together now and have publicly exposed it. One of them is, I've put the link. This is part of the, it's called the Sean Ryan Show. He also sent it to one more person who is a military whistleblower. Now, both of these connected to each other, both gave the data to FBI, and FBI was embarrassed. Because suddenly now we realize there is actually a reason why he did what he did. Otherwise, till then they were saying we don't know. But what he did had nothing to do with blowing himself up. What he did was to become a whistleblower against excesses in the intelligence and in the US military. That's what he wanted to speak up about. He contacted these 2 groups, these 2 individuals, let's say, who had their own shows, to expose. So there's a letter he has put out to them where he says, I'm in danger, I'm being followed by the FBI, I want to reveal this information, these are the details which need to be spread so that you can amplify them as much as possible and make the public aware to avoid the potential for a third world war. This is not a man who's going to blow himself up. He's trying to bring information into the public. So now you see the event is so different from what he has just a few days before exposed. And that's why we understand why he spoke to his girlfriend 24 hours before and he's cheerful. Because he thinks he's doing a great job now. He's going to expose things. He started the process for exposing. He's written to one of them, we need to talk urgently before you go on air with the information I'm giving you. That's when the cabal finds out he's about to blow the whistle and makes an example out of him. That's why he is shot first and then the car made to blow up. So how did this happen with the Tesla car? The car can drive itself. So you can set a certain destination, put this person with a shot body already in and let the car go, stop there, and then you have a remote controlled explosive, you blow it up. That's how you explain how he shot himself first before blowing up the car. And the message was to Trump and Elon Musk from the cabal. And it's a warning. Here's a man who was about to expose us to you, and you think you can expose it to the public. We're warning you, anybody who tries to expose us will be dealt with in this way. That's the message that's going out. How it connects to the other jihadist attack is not obvious, but both came from the same place. Either they did the jihadist attack to cover it up, that there were 2 attacks, or the jihadist attack had an objective which is to now blame Iran and get the US to bomb Iran before Trump takes power. And this, Joe Biden already spoke of this, the possibility of bombing Iran before Trump becomes president, so that he starts the war and Trump is left with a war which he has to stop, or is impossible to stop. So this is the underlying background. Now, why is this important? Because if you look at the mainstream media, all this information is covered up. Even I've given a link to this Sean Ryan show where they discuss what they have found, what they have got in the email that this man sent. But then they go off in a tangent. This is why I'm warning you, do not believe even these analysts, because the analysts make serious mistakes. In this case, one of the speculations they have is that perhaps Matthew is alive. He replaced or he put some other dead body, sent the car, he wanted to send a message, he ensured the car didn't do any damage. No, if he wanted to send a message, he would not blow up a car. He would not put a dead body and commit a crime to send a message and hide in the process. It does not make sense. It does not make sense that they use the same app with the jihadi attack. So you have to again cut through the analysts. They go with their limited understanding or with their limited capacity to reason. They are even suggesting perhaps he's still alive and that he created an appearance. It's a bit like some people who speculated Trump allowed the attack to take place just so that he would get sympathy. No, it's not. It does not work like that. You have to really cut through to see what's behind. So in this particular case, very clearly Matthew was he was killed by the cabal interests that he was trying to expose. What is the content of this message? And I want to share a little bit of this because it's quite astounding what he writes. The links are there, so all those of you who want to go in depth, he speaks of how, he says, I'm not under duress, I'm not under influence or any control. He speaks of these drones. He says, what we have been seeing with drones is the operational use of gravitic propulsion systems powered aircraft by most recently China in the East Coast, but throughout history the US. Only we and China have this capability, US and China. Our OPCEN location for this activity in the box is below. So he gives some reference where the gravitic systems are in use by the US military. Now, this is a fact, I've spoken about this before, that during the Second World War already experiments with gravity control were on in the US. This is part of public documentation. In Nazi Germany, again, this is part of public documentation. In Russia, Soviet Russia, part of public documentation. I have an article, I think it is dated 1928, by Townsend Brown with his senior in university, Byfeld, Professor Byfeld, who in that article, I think it was in Popular Mechanics or one such very well-known journal, the title of the article is How I Control Gravity. He describes how he's able to make gravity cells which are built with capacitors. When he puts a high voltage pulse, at the moment of the pulse, the capacitor moves towards the positive pole with a jerk. So now by pulsing continuously or maintaining a certain pattern of pulses, the whole thing keeps pushing in one direction. Or if you hang it from ropes, the whole thing tilts and stays tilted. This with his professor's name Byfeld, so the two names combined, it was called the Byfeld-Brown effect, which actually exists even today, although largely suppressed. 1928 is openly being discussed. He's giving examples of how this tilt varies according to the position of the sun and moon, because there are gravitational interactions which affect the gravitic effect. He shows how he amplifies the gravitic effect using higher voltages and so on. For the rest of his life, he is building these high power anti-gravity devices. But he goes underground at some point during the Second World War. He's co-opted by the secret projects within the US Navy, and there obviously it went much farther. Soon after, he comes back into public domain in the 1970s. At that point, he's no more talking about his gravity, anti-gravity. Now he's exploring the effect in stones, where under stress, the crystalline structure of the stones, rocks or crystals, gives off electricity continuously. Now this is one of those things which is quite amazing, and again it's one of those suppressed facts. You take a crystal, quartz crystal for example, squeeze, you have a piezoelectric effect. That's a well-known thing. You squeeze it, it gives current. You give current and it changes shape slightly. That's how you create the buzzers within your watches and things. But certain crystals at a certain angle, if you keep the pressure, you tighten a screw and keep it, it continuously gives off current. You don't have to do any other activity. It continuously gives off a voltage and you can draw a certain amount of current. In milliamps, microamps, doesn't matter, but it works. So he called it piezoelectricity, petraelectricity, some term with rock and electricity. So he's working on this through the 1980s. He dies in 1984. In reasonably ripe age. But he has done so much extraordinary things with gravity and free energy already in a different way, publicly and then secretly. So I'm giving an example of how gravity research was going on from a very long time. It's not something new. Stephen Greer, who is the famous UFO whistleblower, says that in 1954 the gravity technology was cracked fully, and they have had the full power since then. Now I believe this because I have seen literature, documentation going through 1952 and 53, where the heads of various companies like Boeing, Northrop, Grumman, British, I don't remember the names, all the big aircraft companies, their CEOs or managing directors are in public statements, in articles, again in Popular Mechanics and such, speaking of how it is the end of the age of aircraft. The airfoil of the wing is no more needed once you have anti-gravity, and we're on the brink of breaking through anti-gravity. They're speaking of it openly. There's even a cover page, again I think it was Popular Mechanics, where they conceive of what the world will be like now that soon we will have anti-gravity. And after 1954, everybody goes silent. All the journals start ridiculing anti-gravity as a concept. Till then, science fiction spoke of anti-gravity. After that, science fiction no more speaks of anti-gravity. They have other means of propulsion. They always need fuel and so on. So something happened around that period, 53, 54. Stephen Greer is right about the date through one of his whistleblowers. But something happened. They found anti-gravity is so easy, so easily controllable, that once you put out the data, anyone can do it. How do you control that? You can't. And with it comes free energy. So they had to suppress the whole thing for cabal interests again. So this man now, let's go back to our text, I've digressed. He's speaking of drones being operated with gravitic propulsion, which China and US both have as technology already. And so it's his statement. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I'm not saying he's right. But he says they're coming in from the East Coast for some reason. Now, to me, it made a lot of sense because suppose you had drones, and even if they are US military drones, why do it only at night? And how is it that they hover for long durations for 4 or 5 hours at a time and then suddenly zip off rapidly? Now, that's almost like UFOs, except you're calling them drones now. Why would you do it at night? Because you don't want people to see how easily they can stay up, because people will start asking questions. How does a battery operated drone stay up for so long? So by hiding it at night, by not showing how small the drone is and yet it stays for 4 or 5 hours, you're hiding the fact that there's some advanced technology being concealed from you. But still they're doing something, we don't know what. So to me it makes a lot of sense. They have some advanced technology, whether gravitic or not. Now I continue to read. He says, China has been launching them from the Atlantic from submarines for years, but this activity recently has picked up. As of now, it's just a show of forces, and they're using it similar to how they used the balloon for signal intelligence and from ISR, I don't know what that is, which are also part of the integrated communication systems. There are dozens of those balloons in the air at any given time. So if you have an anti-gravity device, you could go up, hover above any place, any city, and low enough that you could not be detected and do any kind of communication monitoring. There is no way to avoid it. So what he says, the so what is because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned aircrafts, and they are the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payload capacity and can park it over the White House if they wanted. It's checkmate. So obviously if two countries have it, they would hide it from the rest, but between themselves, they would ensure that they would never threaten. If you threaten me, I threaten you, and so it keeps some kind of control. But they will still spy on each other. So there's more weaponizing about this. I'm skipping that. And he says, I've been followed for over a week now from likely Homeland or FBI. They're looking to move on me and are unlikely going to let me cross into Mexico. But won't, because they know I'm armed and I have a massive VBIED. Vehicle-based improvised explosive device. So he's telling you he has this to protect himself against being arrested. And I've been trying to maintain a very visible profile and have kept my phone, and they are definitely digitally tracking me. Then he goes into some more detail of what he's exposing. I have knowledge of this program and also war crimes. So this program, anti-gravitic or gravitic propulsion programs, and also war crimes that were covered up during airstrikes in Nimruz province, Afghanistan in 2019 by the Admin, Department of Defense, DEA and CIA. I conducted targeting for these strikes of over 125 buildings. 65 were struck because of CIVCAS that killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. US FORA continued strikes after spotting civilians on initial intelligence information. So there's a whole lot of civilian casualties he's exposing, that the military did those strikes despite those casualties. So I'm skipping a little. The administration made it disappear. Some of it had come into the media, but it's war crimes. And the UN declared at that time that these are war crimes. So I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. So he doesn't know if they're attacking him for exposing what happened in Afghanistan or for exposing the fact that he has information on the gravitic systems. I worked with General Miller's IQ staff on this, as well as the response to Bala Murgab, ACBS commander at the time. They can validate this. He gives a name So the name has been deleted here. And then he says, you need to elevate this to the media so we avoid a world war because this is a mutually assured destruction situation. The gravitic systems of China and US threatening each other is a mutually assured destruction because there's no way you can protect from it. And then for vetting, he says, for vetting, my LinkedIn is Matt Berg or Matthew Livelsberger. On active duty, he's still in the military and his profile is put out and he shows he has UAP and USAP access. This is the highest levels of special programs access that he has. So this is not an ordinary man. He's coming from deep inside with actual knowledge and he's exposing it by an email sent out on December 31st, 10:42 a.m. The next day, he's killed in this shot first and his car exploded in a message sent to Trump and Musk. Now, I'm giving this in some detail here and I'm showing you also how the analysts in the media discussion, they were quite shocked. You can see they're stunned by the fact that they received this email. They don't know what to make of this information. They go into speculation where they don't understand that what they're speculating actually does not make sense. The man has been killed for sure. So this is the background I wanted to share of how the media covers up, but also how the cabal operates, how there is deep information which is extremely dangerous. There's a situation which is dangerous, which is being covered up. And all of this is on the brink of the Trump presidency. There are, and the same group doing this Ryan show have earlier, just a few weeks before, interviewed senior people in the US defense as well as military and police who are speaking of sleeper cells all over the US, jihadi sleeper cells, and they are expecting lots of attacks. So all of this is I'm putting together as a warning that things happen. What you see in the media is superficial and often a cover-up. The analysts, even what we call conspiracy analysts, they're not just theorizing, they're analyzing, sometimes they're theorizing, often don't get it. They stop superficial appearances because there are also deceptive breadcrumbs thrown out by the cabal. They know how to manipulate. But when you really go deep enough, it's very rational, it's very logical. And in this case, there is a cover-up in a very, likely a very good man who wanted to blow the whistle on technologies as well as war crimes, and he was suppressed. So this is very quickly the background I wanted to share, which I have titled Dangerous Knowledge, Dangerous Information. So I'll look at the chat box. Narad, if you have anything to say or ask, please feel free. There are many comments from people, all kinds, which sometimes they're just opinions, so I don't have to say anything. So Jessica is asking if Zuckerberg and Google can detect if you love Trump. Why can't they detect these morons? Yes, of course they can. But the point is, they are part of the cabal network. So they are using the network, the means that they have to detect their enemies. They are not interested in their friends. They will protect their friends. I gave the example earlier of this woman from, a professor from Stanford University, who had come out with an accusation against the then Chief Justice, against the Supreme Court Justice who was being inducted. I forget his name now. A very fine man, very religious, and with a clean track record. She comes up saying how he had raped her when he was 18 and she was whatever. In that, she doesn't remember the date. She doesn't remember how she went because she couldn't drive. She was younger than 18. She couldn't drive. How did she end up in the house? And she makes up a whole story. And she, when people started looking after her background, they found it was completely erased. There was no information about her on the internet, no papers published, nothing, and she's a professor. Except there was one thing which was no more on the internet, which was in a published printed paper that was dug out by someone. She's a co-author on a paper which is about how to plant false memories under hypnosis. She's working in the field of psychological manipulation, and it turns out she is the official CIA recruiter in Stanford University. And suddenly the whole picture falls into place. So But they can erase, they can scrub out any individual. So what happens in such cases, the power of the big media is used by the controllers to either scrub out your negative history or to change it to make it whatever they decide should be the current image that you have to have, positive or negative. So yes, it's being used, but to play you. Someone is asking, what do you make of all the hate against H1B visa on Twitter? Is it a sign for Indians to come back to India and improve technology here? It's not so simple. You have to understand that there are those who want to make America great again, for which they think that the means to do that is to throw out everyone else and keep only American citizen. Trump is not part of them, nor Elon Musk. They speak of how US has been able to rise to a world peak by precisely bringing the best minds and the best talents from all over the world. They call it melting pot. Initially they were all entrepreneurs, but later they were all invited or bought out. They literally pay you to join their elite institutions to get the best minds and capabilities. So either they buy you out or they ensure that you are knocked out from the access to advanced information in every field, so that the US keeps the cutting edge. Now all this has been reversed ever since, let's say, the cabal control took over and began to promote China against the US. So all the advanced research, they trained the Chinese, passed it on. Today actually China is on the cutting edge, the US is falling back, at least in the official programs, both in AI and all other technologies. The breakthroughs taking place in China are extraordinary and the US is lagging behind. Trump wants to reverse this, for which he wants the best minds. So H1B visa is a very convenient way of getting the best minds, including from India. So in fact, the number of people from India on H1B is far lower than from other countries, but they end up reaching higher positions. So the attack on Indians being H1B is more a racist attack. That's why I said never generalize to races, always look at specifics, and then you will cut through the clutter. And there are people who actually believe, oh, we have to eliminate H1B so US becomes great. No, US greatness is built on inviting the best minds and getting them to lead in all development. So yes, if it does happen, it won't happen under Trump. He has a different thinking. But if it does happen that if ever H1B is denied, they'll just go to other countries and some of them will go to China. It doesn't mean they'll return to India. So negating H1B is not helpful to India either. Either way, it's not helpful. What India needs to do is create also equivalent strong research institutions, provide the better opportunities. For researchers, it's not how much you pay them. It's the opportunity and the freedom given to you to do the breakthroughs you want to create. That's what attracts. And of course, you have to have enough pay. But that's not such a big deal. If you pay more than that, it's not important to them. And here we have too much bureaucracy. So what Modi is trying to do, and it's a slow process, is to remove the bureaucracy, but he has to use the existing bureaucrat-trained researchers to lead this process. So it takes time, but what he has done recently, which is quite an exceptional thing, it's a world's first. He has called it One Nation, One Subscription. The idea being, in India, access to advanced research journals and papers is too expensive because of the dollar-rupee exchange ratio. So most of our people do not get enough of the latest information. What he has done is he has got the government now paying the subscription. So if you're a researcher, you have full access to all the journals you need. And just that will suddenly bring India to the forefront of cutting edge research and perhaps help it to catch up, to be seen. But there are attempts. It's slow because you have to overcome the momentum of the past. Someone called Educating Myself says OPSEND means operational center. Yes. T. Townsend Brown, he says gravitic physics was expunged from scientific literature in the late 50s. Correct. So after 1954, they actually removed anything to do with gravity, or they made gravity, as you hear it now, space and time bending somehow, and the curvature of space becomes gravity. There's no such thing as gravity. It's a whole lot of incorrect physics. I've spoken about this in my physics talks, where it's actually related to the ether and the stress in the ether. It's very simple how gravity works. I've given hints before, but it's actually very simple. You have an electric field. Let's say Earth has a very strong net negative charge. Sun has a very strong net positive charge. So it actually attracts the solar wind in some way and balances out. But the electric field diverges, because when you move from a sphere, the lines diverge. The divergence of the line creates an electric field which has a certain gradient. Now, if you put a particle which is a ripple in ether pulsing, when it's traversing a divergent gradient of a field, here it's denser, here it's less dense. The pulsation will twist the shape of the circle, which would be an even pulsation in a flat ether. It twists it slightly so that the bulge on the side of the higher density of ether changes just enough that when the next wave forms, its center is displaced. So a wave forms and the second wave is slightly closer and slightly closer. Each pulse of the particle waving, electron has a Compton frequency. It's a frequency pulsation. Each pulse makes it move slightly closer according to the gradient of the ether. That's your gravity. Very simple. Now you change the electric field and the magnetic field to make the gradient less, and you have less pull of gravity. You intensify the gradient, gravity pull becomes more. You reverse the gradient and you have gravity in the opposite direction. It's as simple as this. There I've said it, I was hesitating to put it out, but it's actually as simple as this, and you control it with high voltage electricity and magnetic fields combination. And you can build any field in any direction, anywhere. It's as simple as this. Now the technology to master it, it's a logical consequence of understanding how the ether works and how gravity is formed. I've read papers with some pretty good names. I forget now, one of them is Haicech. This is all more than 10-15 years ago. He writes a paper where he describes how gravity effectively is the difference of speed of light one way from the other. Light going this way is different speed, light way going that way is different speed, and that difference makes for the gravity. He does it with equations. But actually, if you analyze the equations, which to some extent I have done, you actually see the difference is coming from this gradient. Finally, it all comes back to gradient. These other things are symptoms of the gradient. Even light bending around the sun due to gravity, which they will say is because space-time is curved, which is nonsense, is because there is a variation of density of ether. Near the sun more, outside less. So like a lens, because of difference of density, the light curves. It's pure and simple variation of ether density. Master the ether density. How? By electricity and magnetism. There are two qualities, permittivity and permeability. Play with these, modify these, and it's very easy to modify these through crystals and through high voltages. That's where Townsend Brown's work comes. Modify these and you can build a gravity field, modify, reduce, change, neutralize, anything. So it's not difficult. Okay, so that's your gravitics. And gravitic propulsion means with very little electricity, you can neutralize gravity and make for space propulsion and make very high speed propulsions for very low energy content. So you can see how it will radically change the future. So there are a few other questions, comments. So I'll leave the comments. I'm happy with anyone having any opinion, not a problem. So, yes, there's an interesting thing. Ankit asking from Mark Obern's book, remember? 0.001% the experience of reality. He says, Ankit says, there's an incident in Mark Obern's book where while in his out of body in some Middle East country, he also saw a CIA agent in his out of body on some operation. Isn't it scary? Now, I don't think he's mentioned any specifics of the country or the agency. What he does describe is there were these military bases. They were planning, I think he does mention Israel, one of the bases. There are others where he doesn't mention, where they were planning how to defend or attack, etc. And because in that state you see their thoughts, the thinking was so far ahead. And in another base which he does not name, he spoke of how they had a cell for holding extraterrestrials, and in that entire area there was nothing magnetic for whatever reason. Even guns were made of some other material, non-magnetic. and there were people in some holding facilities and so on. So all this shows you very advanced technology going back maybe 20, 30 years, but also to do with extraterrestrials. So obviously there's much more happening behind the scenes. There's one incident which he shared. He has not personally been involved, but he heard from somebody in a particular place in the south of France, Bulrac, it's called Bulrach, Bulrach. In the mountains, there was a group which had come. They were United States, Israeli, and French military personnel with family. They came and settled there for a few years, and they were digging holes looking for a UFO base. And at one point, one of the children playing fell into a hole, and he fell in slow motion. So it's as if there was an anti-gravity field there. And soon after, suddenly overnight, they all vanished. This is the story he has heard from the people living there. So he is in no danger from having spoken this. It's the people there who spoke it. He has not verified himself. So what he found, what he heard from them was that overnight they all vanished. And the story which they were saying, how they know, I cannot say, was at some point they dug a hole, entered a cavern, and as they went in, they met two extraterrestrials who threatened them, saying, "Leave at once, otherwise." They came out, went back to their family. The plates with food half eaten, people had just walked out, leaving everything behind. But what is interesting to me was US military, Israeli military, and French military working together to look for an ET base. Why would they collaborate? What's the connection there? And it just opens to many suggestions. I won't speculate, but you can think about it. So there are interesting things one can see in an out-of-body state, which is why also the cabal wants to ensure you don't wake up, you don't develop your occult and spiritual potential. Certainly you don't go out of the body. They have to dismiss all that, remove it from your education, make you as hard materialistic as possible to block you off from anything higher, and especially not have you wake up spiritually. This is the reason why the entire educational system is across the world, and the media, and social media, and entertainment media, and news media, all are turned towards dumbing you, numbing you, perverting you, sexualizing you in a coarse way, and generally cutting you off from spiritual. Where they cannot prevent this, they will dumb down the spiritual and make it material, so that you do not open to the higher potential. Or they will turn you to drugs in the name of spirituality. It's intentional, so that you don't wake up. And so I come back to the most important message which I have even in this part of the discussion, that yes, you have to wake up and help others wake up, because everything out there is set to do the reverse. There's one more comment I want to look at. This same person, educating myself, says there is an ET base underground near the Ladakh-China border region. I want to comment on this because it's quite fascinating. I hope this will not get the video censored, but it's like this. I heard these stories at first somewhere on the internet, but it was so occasional that it seemed to me almost like someone's speculation. I would have expected that over decades there would have been more material about it. But this is the lesson I've learned. Sometimes the less material, the more likely it's covered up. So I mentioned this in passing to somebody, and then this person said, "Yes, I heard the same and I was there." Okay, so here's the story, and I will just say this person. I won't mention who it is. So this person, he goes to that place for some program. I won't even mention what the program is, and has to be there for a few months. While going there, there are 6 layers of military checks, and all of them are looking for cameras. Interesting. They don't mind you have cell phones, but no cameras. Okay, it's supposed to be border with China, so, but why 6? Isn't that overdoing it? What can you do even if you take a photo? What will China do? They can get better pictures from satellites. They don't need you to be carrying cameras. It's not the old days of spies when you didn't have satellites. So why stop you from satellites? Okay, so this person goes and is there in their program, and here's the story, that just across that wall, it's not China immediately after, there's a valley. The wall means the mountain. So there's a mountain peak, on the other side is a valley, and there's a UFO base. The person hears this hush-hush talk. So he asks one of the locals, hey, what about the UFO base up there? Until then they're smiling. The moment they hear the word UFO base, they become serious, eyes become clouded, they look away, they don't respond, and they walk off. Very strange behavior, isn't it? And of course, now, in that place, there is no internet facility at all, in that last village. Again, you'd ask why? For China, they don't need to send someone with internet to spy. Like I said, we have far better means. You send a drone in the middle of the night without lights. It's very easy to do. And then the drone lands somewhere, they take photos, flies off next day. There are many ways you could do this with very close-up pictures. There's no way to avoid. So why are they blocking the internet? So this person returns, and as it turns out, had taken a few photos, goes to the nearest village where there is internet, and through social media sends out a few photos saying, I was in this place, here's a photo. Immediately there is an attack of people coming, asking details. What did you do? What were you doing? Who's there? What did you get photos? And all kinds of prying questions trying to catch the identity. And the person said it was unnerving. I've never had this kind of an attack on social media. So it was clear the impression he had was there were intelligence agencies which were probing. And they were probing precisely because photos had been taken there. Strange, isn't it? And because it had just been uploaded. And then somebody wrote, did you see the base? Did you hear about the base? And that's how that part also got more exposed. So apparently it's been there for a long time, and it's not the only place. So educating myself says it's been there for thousands of years. Yes, very likely. Because in the ET lifetime, and depending on which ETs, they may live up to 2,000 or more years, even some maybe 10,000 years. They have also the abilities to regenerate bodies using technologies we have mentioned before. So in principle, they can extend quite a bit. Some of them naturally live for 1,000 or more. The tall whites are about 1,000. The so-called Nordics are up to 2,000. The point is not that. The point is, in their timeline, 1,000 years is nothing. So when they set up base, it's done with a perspective. If they make an agreement with the government on Earth, the perspective of the agreements is several hundred years typically, and the governments are locked in, and they realize too late after 50 or 100 years that they have been conned because they could not anticipate their own development, but now they are locked by the agreement, and the agreements are very tight for them, at least the tall whites, as it turns out. So yes, there is a lot of this stuff happening, which is part of the secret government and the intelligence community, because all of this is hidden in the intelligence community or sometimes within the military, but at a very high level. I've tried this a few times, even with pilots. In those days before 9/11, you were allowed to even walk into the pilot's cabin. So many times I had asked, and they had allowed me inside, and beautiful scene. You chat with the pilot to come back to your seat. Afterwards they had a block. Fine, we accept that. But on coming out, so you can't see the pilots, but occasionally when they were standing, I would ask them, hey, have you ever seen a UFO? The guy would give a sarcastic smile and say no, and things like that. Some of them may have been pretending, but I never got someone to say, yes, I have. Maybe they don't see so many, I don't know. But in the military, when I had access to some people, I also asked casually, are there such programs? Are there such projects? They simply said, we don't know. But we do have occasionally observations of unidentified crafts, and we do know that happens, but there is nothing formal that I am aware of. That's the best I could get. But even if they did, they would never speak. These are highly secret, very restricted. Yeah, so there are a few other questions which we'll take up another time. I will avoid speculating. These are things which I'm just keeping as information I've come across, which I tend to believe based on the specifics of the information. So educating myself says I've speculated that this is the reason why yogis are attracted to the Himalayas. No, it's not. There's a spiritual reason, and maybe there's a reason for the bases to be in such places because they're secluded. But the spiritual reason, which you will all experience, and I would highly recommend for you to experience if you have never done that, go up the Himalayas, go up the, let's say, tracing the paths of the Ganga river, because there are some spaces which are more sacred. As you go up, you will find there is rarefied air, but there are also rarefied thoughts. less clutter, less heaviness, less junk, and less people. So, of course, even the thought zone is clearer. But also, it's somehow easier to feel and turn to higher things because of the quality of consciousness and the refined grade, as distinct from when you enter a city or even approach a city. Sometimes the heaviness, the dullness, the darkness, depending on cities, some are quite bright also, but most are so heavy and dark, even your own consciousness gets pulled into this condition. You are as if pulled into that local sense of reality. This is a new concept which I have, or new vocabulary, not concept, that I have picked up from Mark O'Byrne. He speaks of this quite frequently in his new book, which is due out now in January. We'll also try to get an English version of it. So he says, he uses this term, bulle de réalité, that is, I will translate as cocoon of reality or ball of reality, local reality. So, for example, I've said you enter a hospital, there's a reality of the belief system of the doctors and the machinery of the hospital, and you're part of it, you're sucked into it. So, wherever you go, there's a reality of that space, which, depending on how well it's concretized, tends to pull you into it. So, in that state, in that space, your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, your ideas change. You move to a different space, it changes. Observe these things. But as your consciousness begins to get more and more free, you will notice the shift, because you will notice the shift taking place in your superficial parts. You, at a deeper layer, are unchanged. That's when you notice these things. And then you can even modify them, even influence them, create them, etc. So what happens as you go up the Himalayas, not all places, some of them are just barren, nice, but because of less human beings, you have clearer mental space. But other spaces, you feel actually a clarity of a spiritual presence, even actively felt. And there's a difference in quality in different spaces. That's what made for the yogis to feel certain spaces more sacred. And the Ganga and so on are naturally more sacred. So there is a reason for that. But the ET bases naturally also tend to be either deep in the ocean or on mountains, generally, because they want to be away from human beings and not be observed by them. So depending on their objectives, some of them want to observe human beings as a study. Some of them have just part of interstellar travel. They have bases for refueling, for food or other restocking of certain things, depending on their technologies which they use. So they may not be even interested in human beings, depending on their level of advancement. So that's the background. We've gone a bit off topic, but I think it's useful to understand the context of this. I'll come back to the most important part, the lesson for us. Everything out there is designed to keep you asleep spiritually, and even in our higher occult potential, which includes remote viewing, out-of-body travel, telepathy, etc., which would free you from your current false perception of reality and limited perception of reality. To keep us hackable human beings, to keep us slaves to an elite of the cabal, you have to remain half animal. They don't want you to wake up to your higher human potential. You alone can take charge of that. Don't wait for others to do it. When you take charge of that for yourself, you will assist others also to wake up. And as more of us perhaps engage with this, influence our immediate collectivities, this larger awakening might take place. And I'm again going to link it to New Year, what happened. Alina, if you're still online, if you can just come. So there's an observation Alina made in Pondicherry. She went to one of the shops here to buy vegetables. Would you like to share what you saw?
Just a big disappointment, I could say. So it just happened that I was walking maybe a bit too late to get the last vegetables, and there were lots of youngsters on the road, and they were drinking and were so noisy, so low grade. I would say barbaric, because I've never had such a shock. I was so disappointed to see the actual state of the generation.
Would that be the same as what you see in Europe or worse?
No, it's much worse. I've never seen such a thing in Europe. Like I was really, really shocked. Maybe in the worst neighborhoods in Europe where you have all these immigrants or maybe lower grade, rarely you can find something like this. I mean, maybe, I don't know, it's a bit lost. I mean, it's out of control, I think, in Pondicherry. And I was almost crying. It was the first time in Pondicherry when I felt I'm not safe on the streets right now. Why I'm doing this at this time? It was 9 p.m. or 8:30, 9 p.m. It's true, it was New Year's Eve. I don't know, on a regular day, maybe it's not so bad, but just to see that, it was so heartbreaking. I was really thinking, what's gonna be of the future of India if this is what they are seeking for? And there were not many girls on the street. There were only boys. So at least I was at least that.
Yes, I have seen now girls beginning to smoke. Young girls, barely in their early 20s, and openly on the streets they are smoking. So I went and approached one of them and I said, "Do you realize how much is damaging you?" But she said, "But I like it." And I said, "Yes, but you like it in the moment. What happens afterwards? Do you see what happens to people?" "Yes, but I have it under control," she says. She very openly programmed with all the right responses, not realizing the actual consequences. "I have it under control." Everyone, and I said to them, all of them who got into trouble later said it was under control until it was too late. But
I
they just
see a
smiled.
copy paste of what they feel it will make them feel cool European. So this is the perversion that they want to take that appearance of being an European who has that kind of freedom to explore or to do whatever. But because there's no order or there's no regulations, or I don't know, I think it's really going out of control. And there's another observation I need to make with this occasion. I went one day to the pharmacy because I really wanted pure alcohol without anything inside. So this is
For
what we
medical
have
reasons.
for medical reasons. Yes, of course. And I couldn't find that. They said, no, we are not selling. And I went to a few places and then I asked, but why you don't have that pure alcohol? And they said, no, because they start drinking that. And in that moment, I was like, wow, then this is really bad.
Yes. And what is interesting is, We Truth makes a comment, there's only White Town is safe in Pondicherry. No, it's the opposite. They had cordoned off the entire White Town so that everybody could come and party there in the region around the ashram and the rest of the White Town. And this is the sad part. You see, here we want to protect the spiritual atmosphere, and you're inviting the very opposite vibrations. Is the government doing it? And nothing is being done to protect. And so I will even say we are responsible. For me, it was painful also going to the dining room. Today it was the birthday of dining room. And we saw the beautiful tiles which have been there for 200 years. So beautiful. Have been dug out and replaced by white tiles. Oh, because those are old. The beautiful patterns. Every room has a distinct pattern. Mother has walked on those. So many people have. The spiritual presence is so strong. They remove it and throw it out and replace with ugly white tiles.
In Europe, we would pay great money to have those. Okay,
exactly.
Even if we can get them old, we would pay a great a fortune for it.
Exactly, and to protect
just even
them.
for the beauty. So I don't want to imagine about the spiritual value that it had. That was a bit disappointing also.
Yes. So even the decline of values in the ashram community itself because of this, because the people who are taking the decisions are of a grade which is too fallen. And so decisions are also perverse. But all this is to show general decline in society. And I raise this issue because to warn you, it's only going to get worse. I had somebody, a professor from one of the IITs, tell me, across the IIT, this Indian Institute of Technology, the elite technological institutions in India, all of them are into drugs. It's the most common thing in the universities today. It's happening at college level. They're going into alcohol before they enter college, etc. It's happening on such a big scale, so rapidly, the decline. That's my reason of my insistence again and again. Don't wait for others to do it. You have to push back. And all of us in our space, whatever that is, push back. The mother had warned us, humanity is splitting into two groups, one group rising and one group falling. The important thing will be more of us rise, less fall. You can't prevent the fall, but at least get more to fall. At least those who are in between, still not yet fallen. Even those who have fallen and can learn from it and rapidly rise up, you can make the difference. Act. Do not wait. And this is so important for the future of humanity and the spiritual future, the spiritual potential. Otherwise, if the space like the ashram is surrounded by those, what happens to the presence you're going to create? It will be attacked. It will not be able to survive. At night, on New Year's Eve, just after the shouting and screaming at midnight, you hear on the roads near the ashram, people shouting and screaming like banshees as they go riding on scooters and motorcycles. You can feel they're half possessed as if. That's what's happening here around the ashram. Why? Because we did not protect the immediate space around. And it's everywhere in the world. The invasion of the contrary forces, the invasion of dark forces, you have to push back with active light, not with passivity. Remember Sri Aurobindo's warnings. Here where there's a truth to be established, there are enormous forces which are organized against it. And if you don't fight back, if you stay silent, you're giving them the chance to come and destroy the work. You have to speak up, you have to act, you have to push back. Each in your own way, doesn't matter what. And this is to me a symptom. Yes.
Is there any way that the ashram community could ask for this right of having just a pedestrian road
Absolutely.
just around the ashram? That could
Absolutely.
be asked, no?
Absolutely. You see,
Right,
the French consulate,
French consulate
has barriers around it to protect from this kind of
heavy traffic,
yes,
scooters, and
it's
anything.
very easy to do that around the ashram, but they have done the opposite. They asked the ashramites not to keep the cycles near the ashram so that the tourist buses can come and unload their people. They've done the opposite. You see, rather this area around the ashram should have been cordoned off, allowing the ashram community to move within with bicycles and tourists to be kept out, and even if they wander in, they don't come with large vehicles. And even that would make a huge difference. But again, this requires for the management to have a higher spiritual opening or at least sensitivity. But as I've mentioned many times, the current management is hostile even to Sri Aurobindo and the mother and their teaching. And so you can't expect too much. And the destruction happening under them is enormous. It is very sad to see, and some of it is irretrievable. But this is why I say we have to act. You have to speak up. And I'm speaking up to the extent I can, to the extent I can act, I have also done and I will continue to do. But you have to act and speak up wherever you are. There is a huge collision of light and dark, and more intense now, as you can see in the media, in the build-up against even the Trump presidency and Trump's need to push back and the cabal push back. It's a huge. The nature of the battle will be even more intense. But at least now we have, as I said last time, cautious hope, because the light is being able to push back on that level. But in our lives, we have to push back. Don't wait for someone else to do it. You take the steps. Let's take a moment then to concentrate in this aspiration that around within us first, and then around us more and more, a higher understanding and eventually a light and eventually a spiritual light may grow and intensify and inspire others also. Namaste.
Namaste, and thank you so much.